Now, since we learned about how to set a background image and play around with its size, and also we know already how to play around with colors, let's check out some more features of the background. For example, the background attachment property in CSS. Now, to check out the exact working on this, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this image with a much taller looking image that I have. It is sunrise. And by default, this image is in a portrait format, meaning it's much taller than its width, like you see it over here. More of as in clicked a picture with a portrait mode from my phone camera. Now, after setting this image in the background, I need to see how things work better. So first of all, I'm going to see this in full screen. When I try to expand my monitor to the regular 4:3 landscape format of my screen, what I get is an expanded image and nothing else is visible of the image. It would be only available if I'm able to scroll through. To test that theory out, I'm going to add a p type that is a paragraph element over here, and I'm going to paste some random text inside of it. So I generated some random text online, which I'm now going to test out. And this paragraph element, I have already set a style of a font size extra large. By means, it is going to show me huge set of text over here and also allow me to scroll through. Now, if you can see, I'm able to scroll through the image right here without having to worry about the image being lost in the background. That is because I have applied this property known as background attachment. Background attachment basically states how the image has to be attached in the background, whether it should be fixed or should it scroll with the text. So if I change this from fixed to scroll, the image scrolls with me as I scroll down and it does not remain static in the background. This is also known as the parallax effect, also implemented in several websites, and it may appear very fancy, but it's a very simple effect. As you can see over here, when I scroll up, scroll down, this is a scrollable attachment in the background. Whereas I want it to be appeared fixed in the background, I will have to give it a property fixed. This is how you can play around with backgrounds. Now that you learned about background image and background color, you can also create background patterns by some sort of a special background filling. Let's start by getting rid of this paragraph, which we don't need anymore. And let's say I add a simple span element over here, some test content inside it. Okay, all it appears as simple text. Now, mind it, I have zoomed in the content over here in the browser a little bit, so it's much easily available and easily readable to you. I'm also going to create a simple class over here. By first of all, I'm going to create a class attribute and give it a class name, and also create that class over here that is dot myspan. First thing to do is I'm going to give it a little bit of a padding, let's say of 10 pixels, and also give it a background color of aqua. So our span is now visible to us. What if I had to fill the background in a gradient field? By gradient, I mean to say is it has a sort of a filling which goes from one color to the other color, and it is a gradual and slow transition. So for that, we have background image property again, but instead of giving a URL for an image, this time we are going to define a gradient fill. So the first property we are going to look at is known as linear gradient field. And it is more like a function as you can see it, linear dash gradient. And it has parentheses, just like any function being called in a programming language. And inside of these parentheses, we have to provide two variables minimum. That would be the starting color and the ending color, top to bottom. So let's say I want a transition from blue to green, and I have a transition from blue to green. Or should I change it from, let's say, much more brighter colors, that is orange, to yellow? As you can see, there's a tinge of orange on the top of this particular area, which gives you a sort of a feel as if this was a 3D or an inverted background which has some sort of shadow inside it. That's just a play of colors, nothing more. So if I replace my orange color with a red, it becomes more prominently visible. There's an area which is orangish in color because that's a transition between red and yellow. Now, the area of how much transition has to be covered can be also specified, that how much your starting color should be covering. So let's say I take in 40 pixels. It takes up mostly the entirety of the height because it is more than 40 pixels. And now if I take a 20 pixels that again stays very much in the center, let's say I take 10 pixels and it takes up most of it. Now the best approach over here is definitely to have a percentage defined of how much has to be taken up. Let's stick that in the browser. When you see this in the browser, you can also always use the inspect menu, which is the developer tools available inside. And I'm going to dog this on the side for a much better visibility. Now in the developer tools, you can definitely play this around by changing the percentage manually. This helps you to decide upon how much do you want. Now let's say I chose it to be 35%. It gives me sort of a dark red at the top and the transition begins after 30 to 35% of the height has been covered. This is how it works. I can simply change the colors, I can replace them, and definitely I can mark up to what point I want the interchanging to be happening. This is about how you can apply linear gradient. Back to the code again. Let's say I want to create one more span, and this time I'm going to have a much more different approach. Let's also set the percentage right over here. Once I've duplicated the span, I'm going to create a second class name for it. And the second class name that I have created is nothing but my span 2. Let's also add the styling for it. If you can see, in this time, apart from including the colors, I have also given an angle to it, which is 45 degrees. And therefore, the linear gradation has occurred in a slanting 45 degrees. You can also convert this to a different angle if you want. And yes, of course, right after the first color has been declared, you can again declare what amount of percentage do you want to start with. And, it, and as you can see, the change has also occurred over here in the output screen. This is how you can play around with linear gradient. Similarly, we also have radial gradient. For that, I'm going to again duplicate another span and I'm going to name the class separately. Now that you can see I've given it a different class name, let's also give it a different style on its own. So instead of having linear gradient in the background, I can simply have a radial gradient. A radial gradient also has two colors in it. So let's say I begin with a yellow and I settle down with a blue. And as you can see the outcome, at the center it has the starting color and at the end it has the color that it should end with. Similar to the previous one, you can also have the percentage declared of how much has to be covered with the starting color. So the gradient filling over here is also changed according to the percentage defined in your code. So let's say I reduce the percentage down to 25% and the radial focus is also changed. This can be done as per your need. Now, why I'm telling this? Because you can also create your own patterns. Talking about patterns, they can be really easily achieved by using background gradient fills. And there's a very simple way of doing it. So first of all, I'm going to get rid of these two particular items which I created, the three spans and the style declarement, the style declaration for the spans. Next, I'm going to create a simple div, and as there is no content inside it and there's no background color or height set to it, this particular div is not going to be visible. Therefore, I created this style to give it a finite width and a finite height. Therefore, we can visualize our div. And for now, I've given it a background color. The similar to the background image property used for radiant fill, we can repeat the same for background gradient patterns. Instead of using a linear gradient field, we are going to use a property known as repeating linear gradient. And inside of it, I can simply declare the two colors that I want. Let's say, for example, yellow and red are the two colors I want to use. And it works simply like the way it used to work for normal gradient field, except and the second color or the last color is declared. Right after that, you can introduce a simple space and declare how much amount of the height of this element do you want to utilize for separating the pattern. So let's say I decide 5 pixels and it creates a pattern which is 5 pixel thick and it has two colors inside of every 5 pixel width. I can turn it to 15 pixels or maybe even 35 pixels, or I can simply use some sort of a percentile over here. Now it won't be fun to just have an angular, just have a plain vertical fill. We can also give an angle to it, just like the normal linear gradient. We can introduce an angle in the beginning of it, and we have angle to our pattern. Now, similar to the pattern created using this gradient fill, we can also use a gradient fill pattern of the radial type. So firstly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment the background image property over here. And next, I'm going to create the background image property again with a repeating radial gradient. Same thing again. Let's try using two different colors. I'm going to use blue and green, and also introduce the amount of width that has to be utilized by it. Let's say percentage. And here we go. I can reduce or increase this percentage over here to see how my pattern looks. That's how gradient fill works. You can have gradient fields stacked above one another by utilizing transparent colors within them for your one element inside the other to create different sorts of effects. I'm sure you can try it out and you can see some examples around.